Need do? Need do? Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second panel of Peace Week Albania 2024. My name is Kristi Qina. I'm the president of the UN Association Albania. It's a pleasure for me to moderate this very interesting panel discussion revolving around the state of the YPS agenda in the Western Balkan region. As some of you may remember from the introductions this morning, Peace Week Albania has been conceived as a temporal or thematic journey, we said. We started this morning with a stock take on the global progress on the YPS agenda, and I'd like to mention some of the key elements that were discussed during the panel this morning. We talked about the origins of the YPS agenda, the importance of having a holistic, a thorough approach on youth participation that is not only just the opposite of tokenism. We talked about the benefits of mainstreaming youth perspectives in policies versus the risk of diluting or maybe watering down a bit the YPS agenda. Careful considerations and reflections were done on working with different cultural norms regarding youth participation. An example from Syria was brought where young people are expected to speak only after the adults, and reflections and discussion took place on how to navigate through those different cultural norms. Localizing the YPS agenda while creating spaces for learning and exchange between different regions, such as the Western Balkan region and Northern Africa and the Arab region. We talked briefly about two very interesting concepts, the global economy of violence and also the transformation thereof, and how we can reverse those mechanisms, starting with being aware of their existence and how they work. And finally, we talked how intersectionality, rights-based approaches, and other principles should be integrated from the get-go on the work of the YPS, and why such approaches are actually even sometimes more important than having an actual action plan or similar policy documents. Now, without further ado, I would like to present and to invite the panelists who will join me and will join us today. We have the pleasure to have here Ms. Masha Vracar, Program Coordinator at the National Youth Council of Serbia. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Ms. Jana Minochkina, a Youth Advisor and Coordinator of the YPS Program United Nations Mission in Kosovo. Thank you very much for coming today. Also, we have Ms. Sania Fatko, representative of the National Youth Congress of Albania, with extensive experience also on the YPS and WPS agenda. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Professor Vedran Dicic joining us online from Austria. He's a senior researcher at the Austrian Institute for International Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us online.
Thank you for the invitation.
Without further ado, I would like to start with painting a bit a global general picture on the progress of the YPS agenda in 3 different countries of the Western Balkans region. I would like to start first with Serbia. Masha, the National Youth Congress of Serbia has put YPS as one of its strategic priorities and has been working on its implementation since. Can you share with us the progress of this agenda in your country, the mechanisms that you have used, the coordination methods in place, and where is Serbia right now regarding this agenda?
Right, of course. So thank you once again for inviting us, to you and your entire team. It's really a pleasure to be here and to share a bit of an insight on what we have been doing regarding the YPS agenda in Serbia. As you have heard, I come from the National Youth Council of Serbia, which is an umbrella body for all of our youth organizations and for youth organizations. We gather around exactly 108 organizations across Serbia, and we try to deliver this sort of advocacy platform for them, for the young people from the civil society organizations, but young people as individuals. Also to have space to communicate directly with the decision makers in our country. This is one of our main goals, and that's why I like to say that we have been doing the YPS agenda way before it was called that, since our National Youth Council exists for 13 years now. And regarding specifically our YPS activities, we like to call our approach to the YPS activities, going back to what Milena was talking about this morning on how we can implement the agenda actually in different modalities. We like to say that we are mainstreaming the YPS agenda, which actually means that we are trying to incorporate its pieces into what we are already doing. So as you may know, the YPS agenda has the 5 pillars. We have participation, protection, prevention, partnerships, and disengagement and reintegration. And I'm happy to say that COMS is conducting its activities in pretty much all of the pillars except the last one. So both on a local, on a national, regional, and even an international level. We can go a bit more in depth later on as the questions go by, but participation is the core of pretty much everything we do, but our flagship project in that way, if we can call it, are our dialogues with the decision makers. For years now, we've been conducting this series of dialogues with the Prime Minister, with the ministers in charge for youth, for social dialogue, for gender equality, etc., and really providing the physical space for young people to meet with their decision makers and ask the questions they want to ask them and actually see what sort of initiatives can grow from them. Later on, in regards to protection, we do a whole lot of advocacy on combating physical violence, for example, towards young activists, or digital violence, for example, through our campaigns against digital violence on young women. Prevention and partnership, the last two ones, when we're talking about prevention, this is where a huge part of our work actually lies, because we try to gather as much data as we can before we actually go into our advocacy processes. So the first thing we do when we encounter something we haven't been working on before is actually setting a really nice basis on what we have regarding information. So for YPS, we've also published some research, which is like a desk analysis of all of the policies that can be regarded as YPS relevant. So it is youth policy, but it's also foreign policy, security policy, it is also gender equality policy, education, culture, arts, employment, science and technology, really anything that can help empower young people and contribute to their feeling of safety and stability. And after this overview, we have developed some sort of a set of recommendations on how all of the policies can actually be adjusted in a way they fit the agenda better, or where the agenda actually fits in these policies. So how can we make strategies that are a bit more youth-friendly, how we can adapt some sort of action plans that we already have in a way that they fit the goals of this agenda, etc. So in a nutshell, this is what we have been doing in the recent years. Of course, there have been a lot of workshops, different advocacy campaigns, but also our engagement on the regional and the global level, which is regionally, of course, most significantly our partnership with the National Youth Councils all across the Western Balkan 6 through different mechanisms such as RICO, such as the Regional Cooperation Council, Connecting Youth Platform, etc. But also globally, we're part of some big advocacy networks that gather peace builders, and especially young peace builders, to deal with the YPS agenda on more of a global level. So we're pretty much still at the beginning when we're talking about how the actual decision makers see and regard the YPS agenda in our country, but I don't think this is something that comes as a surprise. I think we're all in the region pretty much on the same level, but I think we have developed a very sturdy base and have a lot of potential for actually implementing the agenda successfully in our country in the following years.
Well, thank you very much. That was very thorough and fast also. From one of the analyses that COMS has produced, I read that on a survey with young people regarding their knowledge of the YPS agenda, around 16% declare that they have heard of the YPS agenda, and I'm sure that if a similar survey would run in Albania, Kosovo, and other countries, the results would be pretty much the same. So I think this is one of the reasons why your approach in implementing, localizing the YPS agenda is through mainstreaming youth perspectives through different policies. Now we'll move on to another very interesting example from Kosovo. In 2017, the United Nations mission in Kosovo organized the very first youth assembly. And one of the most notable outcomes of that assembly was a roadmap on youth peace and security in Kosovo. Ms. Jana, if you can walk us through a bit on this initial step in 2017, what did the roadmap contain and how the youth assembly and the roadmap has evolved until today in 2024?
About Brahma Tajitha. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a great pleasure. And it's a wonderful example also of cooperation, because with Christelle we met throughout the UN Youth Assembly, already the 6th one. So we continue with this as the annual platform. And I'm very happy to see this ongoing cooperation and building up on this. I also, if I may ask Suhail to help, just to skip and to go through the situation in Kosovo, so just to skip through the first slides, because sometimes pictures they speak louder than words, and I have a few things to show as well. But my experience with YPS actually comes from a way before. I joined the field as a youth activist in 2014 and 15, and I was part also of the many initiatives when myself, I was bringing the youth voices to the decision makers. We were part of the International Youth Peace Movement with UNOY, and I also put my fingers on drafting some parts of the resolution back then. But again, back then we didn't really believe it will go, we wanted to believe in this, but it felt so far away from the reality. And we had these meetings across different time zones globally, working from, I don't know, Australia, Canada. I was between Albania and Russia, because it was the way how the life was happening back then. And in 2015, I joined the UN mission in Kosovo as the UN volunteer in October, and the resolution, as you know, was adopted in December. So it was very fresh, and I was this fresh newbie running around the mission with a piece of paper saying, now you have to work with young people. And I don't think the mission was taken this much seriously at that stage. To be honest, little did they know. So the very first activities already happened in February 2016, because the UN mission was working actively on incorporating the voices of young women back then, of women as such, through the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which is much older than the Youth, Peace and Security. And it helped because for the first time, we actually invited the young women to be part of the discussions. And we used this entry point as the synergy between YPS and WPS to start talking about the real issues. So we didn't have any kind of budgetary arrangements on the mission and so on, but it was the first time when these concerns came so strongly, and the mission realized that maybe they have to start listening to young people. Then we also tried to connect this to the ongoing priorities of the mission with the integration of the judiciary. So it was this process of connecting the Kosovo judicial system and Serbian judicial systems and trying to find the compromises in between. And we invited the young lawyers to speak about the issues from the perspective of young professionals. What kind of issues they have without saying this is Albanian issue, Kosovo, Serbian, and so on, without having this ethnic labels, but saying that, okay, there are issues with translation of legal documents, for example, in the official languages, issues with paid internships, especially for students coming from the non-majority communities, issues with, I don't know, just simply sometimes opportunities to find a job in their own language and in their own areas. And these all issues, they relate to peace and security. So we try to unpack what this, the big loud letters of the youth, peace and security mean in very concrete issues. And a bit on the background, I mean, many of you know the situation in Kosovo, but it's very complex, it's a very young population. So when I came to Kosovo, it was 70% of the population under the age of 30. Now it's roughly between 52, 58, different data. It's also a very divided population, unfortunately, because there are still many wounds from the conflict, and there is the gap between communication of young people from diverse communities. It's also the language gap that often youth, when they meet from, Serbian community, from the Albanian communities, Turkish, Bosnian, and so on, they have to use the third language, which is either English or German. And every single small activity would have to have the translation budget, which for the youth NGO, sometimes it's just expensive. And unless you have people who speak both languages, you have to improvise around. There are many also issues which are involved with the exclusion of young people from decision-making processes, tokenism, also things that were discussed during the first panel. So a lot of things are happening to tick the box, or to have X number of Albanians, X number of Serbs in the room, and we call this multi-ethnic. And it's far beyond that. There was a scary data by the IOM, International Organization for Migration, in 2018, when they found out that over 70% of young Albanians and young Serbs, they never spoke to their peers from the other community. So we're talking about literally the existing parallel realities. Maybe just next slide, please. Let's skip those ones. Let's skip it. It goes further. Yeah, talking about the parallel realities also. There are many unresolved issues. So you see newborn. This is the old design. It changed many times by now. Newborn from Pristina, like as a newborn country. And the same structure, the missing monument is in Gračanice, which is Serbian area next door. It's 12 kilometers away from Pristina, but few people know. And with the very first youth project that we did together, I had to force the young people to come and see that the names behind, there are names of people from different communities who lost their lives during the war. There are Albanian names, Serbian names, Turkish, Roma, I mean, many other ones. And until now, there are over 1,600 people missing from the war. And unfortunately, this issue is heavily politicized. So there are many issues which are unresolved, many issues which are used to manipulate the dynamics between young people. And when we try to talk about the future, there is always somebody in the audience trying to bring this to the past, and then it's very hard also to proceed further. So I think one of the challenges with youth, peace, and security in Kosovo was first to establish these moments of shared discussions, to start talking to each other, to meet each other, but also to start talking about concrete issues which help people to move forward, without forgetting the past, of course. So we can move to the next slide. And we started to have these meetings with young people from different communities, asking them how do they identify the problems first. So it's like pre-story before the youth assembly a bit more. And indeed, there was a shared agreement that the problems are very much the same. And in this case, if the problems are shared, maybe the solution should be shared as well. We can move to the further ones. So talking about the youth assembly. I personally, as a youth activist in the past, and even now working for nearly 9 years with the UN Mission Kosovo, I don't believe in the top-down solutions. Unless it comes from young people themselves, unless they feel that there is an issue, I feel that no matter what the UN will say them to do, it's not sustainable. And in 2017, we organized the first youth assembly. We were inspired by the global one, because in 2016, I was myself in New York at the Global UN Youth Assembly in Kosovo. I came back very inspired and very angry. There was no one from Kosovo, no one from the Balkans as such. And brilliant ideas, great discussions, but I felt like it's so far from the region. And the answers were budget, the political issues, whatever else. So the idea was to bring the event to Kosovo, and by now we grew up to the regional event. The last 3 years were regional. This year we have also again the regional format in May and June. We have a big event coming up. But yeah, the first event was the consultation on the youth, peace, and security agenda. And the idea was to unpack these big, loud UN letters into something which makes sense to the local people from all communities. So we had 140 youngsters on the spot at the event from all communities, and we really went beyond. We tried to speak to the unusual suspects, if I may. So we went through the schools, through the youth centers, through not necessarily NGOs, but really trying to reach out through the municipalities out of Pristina mainly. And then we had 800 young people online, because we really want to have more voices also on what's happening. Similar to what you did in Serbia also, we work mainly with 4 pillars, so we don't touch the disarmament, because luckily we don't have to, and I hope we'll never have to. And we collected those recommendations. We ended up with 50 recommendations that formed the Kosovo roadmap on youth, peace, and security. What I love about them, they're very specific, very concrete. For example, when we speak about participation, we speak about let's say, the youth budgets and the youth councils. And if the municipality is multi-ethnic, which is the case with at least 10 municipalities in Kosovo, out of 38, then the youth council logically should be multi-ethnic as well. What was happening in practice is that often you have the Serbian-speaking youth council and Albanian-speaking youth council, which never talk to each other. So what we started, like based on this recommendation, we started a capacity building program when we would bring these people together and try to create a space for them to see that maybe it makes more sense to work together. And they have a bigger voice, they can advocate for better budgets, they can have better advocacy also for the needs of all young people in the municipality. For example, under the, again, protection and participation, because some of them they're connecting. For example, when it comes to the inclusion of young people with disability. And we always have the participants with disability in their audience. So one of the recommendations that came was that many buildings, they would tick the box. They would say, yes, there is a rampa, but if the angle is like this, it's unusable. And one of the recommendations was to actually encourage the cooperation between young people with disability and NGOs who work with people with disability in general, without age gap on this, to encourage them to work with the students of architecture, again, connecting youth with youth, because students of architecture are the ones designing the buildings of tomorrow. So it makes sense if they feel the needs, if they know the situation better, then next day when they program the build, like the design and so on, they will think about those issues. So again, these are not the rocket science recommendations. They seem very logical, and there is this moment of like, duh, in a way, but sometimes they don't happen, unfortunately. And what was a very powerful moment for myself and also for the UN mission back then is that the first youth assembly was organized in cooperation with the United Nations Youth Task Force, which was a team of young volunteers. coming from different parts of Kosovo, different communities. I was mentoring them also to be part of the event and to help co-organize the event. I'm very happy to see that by now it's 4 generations of the group. So we have Suzy here in the audience. She can tell you more afterwards. She's now part of the current generation of the team. So Helios, we work together a lot in Kosovo on these issues. Indeed, it was the initiative of young people who came to the mission afterwards, demanding that we should work together on implementation. Because recommendations are beautiful, but they would end up in another report to the UN, and that's it. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. Unless there is a driving force, which are young people themselves, unless they believe in this and they start working with other youth, nothing can happen further. And I'm very grateful also because we pushed a lot from different sides, but it happened, so the mission recognized the work of young people. The group first existed as the United Nations Youth Task Force. Then we realized they need more space to be independent and to have their own voice. So now they're called United Youth Task Force, Network of Young Kosovo Peace Builders. I think by now we have around 8,700 people who went through the activities. The core team changes, so it's usually a small team, so now we have 7 people as a core team, but again, it changes based on the activities and so on. And we continue working together on those recommendations. So if I can just show maybe so if we can skip through the things just to go directly to the areas of activities. Yeah, these ones. So we have 3 main blocks that I work personally, and then there are also other elements that the mission took over. Because we had this mapping study after the consultation, after the roadmap was adopted. We had the mapping study within the mission, because we have also offices on human rights, for example, justice team, gender team, Office of Community Support. We also met with the Kosovo institutions, so we worked with the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Youth. I mean, they all have longer names, shortening to the main areas. OSCE, Council of Europe, civil society, of course. So we did this kind of mapping to see who wants to take over which areas, because these 50 recommendations, they are literally, if they happen, Kosovo will be probably the best place for young people to be. And we're still walking a long walk. And the areas that I personally focus on through the program are the inclusive youth participation in local governance. So we work with municipalities and with the central government. We work with the youth council, we work with the councils, youth parliaments, advocacy trainings, but also sometimes it's about building the partnership between the municipality and young people themselves at the local level. Because often they see it as, tick the box thing, they invite you, they take a fancy picture, put it on the website of the municipality, nothing happens afterwards. So we try to kind of push for this not to happen. Then the other angle is, and I mentioned already, the divide between the communities. The other angle is bring the young people from different communities together. It's intercultural dialogue, it's learn from each other. And I love this picture because with these girls we briefed the United Nations Security Council in 2020. So Angela, she's from Gračanica. She's a Serbian girl. Dielza, she's from Drenica, the area which was badly affected during the war. So Serbian girl, Albanian girl, not to tick the boxes, but they became really good friends. And they came up with the idea of the Kosovo Youth Fest. Kosovo Youth Fest was first organized in 2018. We had 160 people at the first one, and then it became an annual event. So we had 3 events by now, then COVID happened, so we still have to recover after that. We didn't, unfortunately, do after COVID, but hopefully this year. And the idea is just to celebrate the culture, to celebrate the music, to celebrate the songs. Flags are banned, so we don't use any flags, not to have any kind of ethnic discussions and clashes. But instead of tickets, everybody brings an item that symbolizes their culture. So people bring food, people bring some traditional clothing, somebody plays a song, somebody organizes a game, anything. And I don't need to explain. And also for me, the previous picture was very symbolic because I'm half Russian, half Ukrainian, which by now is unfortunately double trouble and everybody knows what's happening. But since I grew up through this, I would never see it as a divided identity. I would always be proud of both sides. And when the war started to happen, for me it was very hard to face the reality. And while I have my strong political opinions about supporting what happens, like supporting Ukrainian side, but without talking about this, for me it was very important both sides of my identity stay. So it was actually my wedding dress that I made myself, and I was wearing this Ukrainian flower crown with a traditional dress which comes from my area of Russia, which is Urals, the mid-Russia. So it's the area of forests and mountains, and we have a lot of green. That's why the dress is green. And unfortunately, a lot of friends, when they saw this picture, they unfriended me saying, you have to choose. And it's about my roots. So also in a way for me, living in the Balkans for nearly 13 years, I keep seeing young people stuck between these identity lines, that they have to choose and they have to stick to some part of the story. We see this a lot also in Kosovo, and it's a very sad dynamic that I do a lot of, I like to dig deeper when we do the events. And when we do, for example, the Google Forms, I ask what age they start to engage with the civil society activities. And it's very sad to see the gap, because often the young Kosovo Albanians, they would say it's around 14, 15. They're very young. When it comes to the young people from the Serbian community, they would say 22, 23, 24. And you have this gap, which is, I mean, it's the gap through which many things happen differently. And already it means that, you know, if young person is 22, 23, they would start looking at job, family, and, you know, they don't have so much time, but also I ask why. And often the question is the community pressure. The young people don't feel safe, that they feel the pressure from the schoolmates, from the family. They say we have to be independent enough, we have to be, you know, strong enough to go and meet the neighbor and to talk and to realize that we're not that different. And of course everybody has their own issues, but still like, we can do many things together. But you have to have the courage to enter into this, to overcome the stigma and to overcome the pressure. And it's also, when we think about activities under youth peace and security, we should think about this, how not to do harm, how to create a space that young people feel safe, they feel that they are encouraged to engage, and not to tick the box, but because they really care about doing something together. And that's why another element, so we also have this interesting learning programs, the intercultural dialogue. These are the pictures from the project, which I love personally. It's called Four Angles of Kosovo. So if you imagine the map, it's like a diamond. And throughout the week, we travel with the UN bus. We go through all the 4 angles. And each 4 angle, we meet with the mayors, we meet with civil society, we meet like here, like we went to the monastery and to the teche and to the mosque to learn about different aspects. Plus we have the training program, and it's a lot of interaction between people and really seeing the different reality without just, you know, talking about this, but living through this. Yeah, and I mentioned already that's always done in cooperation with young people. So we keep working with the Youth Task Force, we keep working also with more organizations throughout this. It's always the partnership that we keep and we're proud of. And most of these activities, they come directly from young people themselves. And the next element, that's how we support this. It's also the element of the small grants. So what I believe are the success elements behind the Youth Peace and Security program that I'm in charge of is that first we had the consultation. So we try to localize the YPS agenda. Then we have the youth team who are, you know, the driving force behind this. We have the advocacy team. And we keep building up the connection with this team. We keep working together through trainings, through inviting more young people, through really expanding and building up on this peer-to-peer learning element. But also we have this element of direct support to the initiatives that come from young people. So at the Youth Assembly, that became annual since the first event, we have by now 6 of them. They all have different topics, but they all connect to youth peace and security. Like this year in June, we spoke about youth peace and security in the AI era. So it's like, you know, the big issue, we connect this with the youth peace and security aspects, but we try to unpack it throughout what's practical now. We have this element of small grants. So we support, last year we support, for example, 5 initiatives with the grants up to 2,000. And this is an example from the previous years, the Astro Club Under One Sky. We actually have the founder of this initiative here with us in the room. We have Suhail, who's helping me with slides. And he's also the director now of the Pristina Observatory. But the initiative was born at the Youth Assembly, when for the first time, so Suhail was leading the astronomy club for a long time, but was mainly Pristina-based initiative. And for the first time, they met with youngsters from Gračanica and from different Serbian areas, and they built this idea of organizing astronomy camps. From one hand, to learn about astronomy and universe, but from the other hand, also to connect youth from different communities around, you know, the shared interests. They won the grant through the tough competition. They organized the Astro Camp, and then they had also 10 sessions in different municipalities. And they went north and south, so they tried also to ruin the stigmas that north is scary, you know, like things are happening. It can be, but it's also about making the first steps. They came with the telescopes and shesh on the squares, talking about these activities and engaging more young people. And this is one of the examples what happens once, you know, UN will never think about those initiatives as such. And this activity is out of the box that really bring people together, they start the discussions, and then we can build also with these youth teams, talking about more serious issues on youth peace and security, and trying to unpack more, you know, like much more complicated, much more difficult, much more sensitive issues. But this is a great entry point. And yeah, talking about this, talking about dreaming big, 2 years ago, with the UN support, and I'm very proud because also I was coordinator of the project, worked together with Suhail. We brought it back to life. It's an open invitation to everyone to join. It's in the city center, so next time you're in Pristina, please pass by. Suhail can tell you more about this afterwards. But now it functions as the multi-ethnic youth hub that brings together young people from different areas, different communities. There are regular classes. There are, you can see the sky and like, the solar observation, the stars with the telescope, and many things are happening. And just to cut the story, okay, this example is from the Youth Assembly. So again, I mentioned already the AI theme. Just seeing like the long list of partners. Also like some photos from the events. And just coming to the end point, how it changes and why it's important. And that's the final slide also on this. Is that we do this post-activity studies about how young people feel about engaging with young people from different communities. And it's really changing a lot in the way that these activities, the first interactions, they create the partnerships, they create friendships, which go forward. And personally for me, like the blue one is not only youth who, like the orange is, they loved it, it's positive, they changed their mind about something, they want to continue. The blue ones is they want to continue and they want those for the other young people themselves. So it's this multiplication component. And that's where I believe we as also, as, like myself as a program manager, myself as a person who works on these initiatives, that's where we focus. Because when I see this, I follow up with these young people afterwards, and when we have the next activity, I invite them to join, I also invite them to be part of the team. So it becomes this, this umbrella Merimanga thing that spreads further. Yeah, a bit from my side. I tried to bring it practical. Sorry, I know I took a lot of time to talk about this.
Thank you very much. It was a very thorough presentation. It exhausted many questions I had. But thank you very much for mentioning the challenges, barriers that were and still are in Kosovo context. Impressive initiatives that you have implemented throughout the years with tangible impact and results. Thank you for mentioning the budgeting, which is aspect, which is really interesting, and I will ask a bit later also other panelists on where do we stay with budgeting for YPS in Albania and in Serbia. And also, thank you for showing us how you have found mechanisms to include the perspectives and perceptions of also marginalized youth and youth with special needs in building this roadmap and then implementing the roadmap. Now we will move quickly a bit to the Albanian context. The YPS agenda in Albania has, of course, a different development, a different story. UN Association Albania, together with the National Youth Congress, signed a Memorandum of Understanding in 2021, paving the way to a joint effort in localizing it in Albania. YPS, Youth Peace Security, was declared one of the flagship initiatives of the Tirana European Youth Capital in 2022, and many initiatives have been organized since then. Some have brought results, some less positive results, but have brought challenges and work that needs to be done. Now I would like to pass the floor to Ms. Ania to explain us a bit this journey, lessons learned, and also how does the National Youth Congress see the future of the Youth Peace Security agenda in Albania.
Okay, unë do të flas shqip. Në pamundësi do.
Yes, Masha, you can use that. Yeah.
Në fakt, në pamundësi për të ardhur drejtorisha ekzekutive e Kongresit Rinor Kombëtar, erdha unë për të përfaqësuar dhe ndërkohë për të parashtruar se çfarë konkretisht Kongresi Rinor Kombëtar ka bërë dhe është duke bërë në zbatim dhe implementim të agjendës Rinia, Paqja dhe Siguria. Ishte impresionuese, qoftë kolegja nga Kosova, qoftë kolegja nga Serbia, për atë çka po bëhet në nivel rajonal, dhe doja të thoja që kemi pika të përbashkëta në aktivitetet tona, ndërkohë që kemi edhe specifikat tona. Kongresi Rinor Kombëtar ka një profil të veçantë, ka profilin një organizate ombrell, e cila përfshin 144 organizatët të tjera që punojnë për rinin dhe me rinin, dhe në këtë kuadër është, si thuash, adapt për të marrë përsipër misionin për të bërë implementimin e agjendës rezolutës 2535. Ku jemi? Në fakt, jemi duke bërë. Jemi duke bërë qoftë në nivel partneritetesh, në nivel bashkëpunimi, në nivel projektesh, në nivel ofrimi shërbimesh të ndryshme për rinin në kuadër të kësaj agjende. Do të përmendja ashtu sikurse edhe Kristi përmendi që ne kemi bërë memorandume, që do thotë Kongresi Rinor Kombëtar ka bërë një qasje serioze për implementimin e agjendës dhe në këtë moment ka bërë memorandum edhe me Rajkon edhe me UNN, dhe ndërkohë që është në partneritet po gjithashtu me Komsion e Serbisë, kemi bërë edhe workshope, pra qoftë në nivel kombëtar, qoftë në nivel rajonal, por edhe në nivel europian, me Forumin Rinor Europian, jemi në bashkëpunim për të implementuar agendën e Youth Peace Security. Nëse do të flisja për veçorinë dhe veçantinë e Kongresit Rinor Kombëtar, do të përmendja Kristi faktin që ajo ka potencialin për të hyrë në nivel lokal. Duke pasur 12 qarqe që kanë Kongresin Rinor Kombëtar prezent me shoqatat përkatëse, në nivelin lokal është shumë e rëndësishme që të fillojë implementimi i agjendës paqes, rinisë, paqes dhe sigurisë. E themi këtë për faktin e thjeshtë sepse gjithçka do të vinë nga poshtë që të shkojë lart. Do të thotë që nuk ka më saktë se sa të rinjt ato në nivel lokal të sjellin ato çfarë dhe si duhet të implementohet kjo agjendë, me specifikat e saj për shoqërinë shqiptare dhe sidomos për nivelin lokal. Mund të them që jo më larg se sot isha në një focus group jashtë Tiranës dhe do e themi me zë të lartë dhe drejt për drejt që të rinjt atje nuk e kishin dëgjuar ndonjëherë se çfarë ishte rezoluta rinia, paqja dhe siguria. Do të thënë, më pas të mblidhje perceptimet e tyre rreth kësaj, të mblidhje këndvështrimin e tyre dhe të kuptuarit të tyre ishte akoma më e vështirë. Kështu që del një mision i qartë para nesh. Jemi duke bërë aktivitete, por akoma më agresive dhe e kemi edhe planin. Asambleja e Kongresit Rinor Kombëtar mblidhet një herë në vit, edhe në grumbullot në dhjetor të 23-shit, në krye të gjithë listës problematikave që merr ajo përsi për të realizoj, ishte implementimi dhe marrja e rolit kryesor të Kongresit Rinor Kombëtar për implementimin e agjendës rinia, paqja dhe siguria. Nuk po vazhdoj me aktivitete konkrete, ju më pyetët për rreth një eksperiencë që kam pasur, është e vërtetë, unë kam qenë pjesë e grupit iniciator edhe implementues të agjendës gruaja, paqja dhe siguria. Ishte e para në llojin e saj që po zbatoi në Shqipëri, duhet thënë kjo, dhe pati vështirësi. Sfidat ishin të shumta, u realizua në parim, por mësimet që nxorrëm nga ajo ishte pa përfshirje, pa pjesëmarrje, pa partneritete, pa rjetëzime, nuk mund të realizohet. Absolutisht, prandaj dhe mënyra dhe metodologjia që u përdor për rezolutën 1325, gruaja, paqja dhe siguria, ishte në bazë koalicioni. Do me thënë shoqatat e shoqërisë civile në Shqipëri hynë në koalicion dhe morën përsipër të bënin implementimin e saj. Nëse do të përmendja sfidat dhe nivelin më të lartë të vështirësisë, pavarësisht mekanizmave që përdori, mund të them që sfida e parë ishte implementimi në nivelin lokal. Kam ndjesinë dhe përshtypjen që ishin sporadike dhe mbetën sporadike, me gjithë përfshirjen, me gjithë angazhimin. Sfida e dytë ishte në lidhje me institucionet qeveritare, qendrore. Duhet thënë, unë isha në grupin e monitorimit aktivitetit të parlamentit ton, parlamentit shqiptar, dhe nëse fillon një qasje jo shumë ndjeshmëri dhe një qasje jo shumë korrekte nga një institucion kaq i rëndësishëm, kjo do të thotë që është problematike mësane për të sqaruar apo për të implementuar akoma më tej. Gjithsesi, duhet të theksoj që ndërkohë gjithë ajo eksperiencë më dha një guid se si, ku dhe çfarë duhet të bëj. Mua personalisht dhe grupit të punës që ishim aty.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience and some lessons learned from the journey of the Women Peace and Security Agenda in Albania and what the Youth Peace Security Agenda can learn from it. Now I will give the floor to Professor Vedran. a lot of initiatives were shared right now, a lot of positive examples. In my, they were uplifting, optimistic. In my view, optimism is not necessarily a feature that we have in the Western Balkan region. I felt like we needed some cold shower and to enter into a bit more complex discussion. So when we talk about youth, peace, and security, and youth participation, the horizontal pillar, without participation, none of those other pillars can be achieved. The contributions of young people to peace and security cannot be achieved if there is not meaningful youth political participation. So in your view, how do you see the status of youth political participation in the Western Balkans region right now?
Thank you so much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, and sorry for not being able to join you in Tirana. I see this is a wonderful event. I will probably a lot of networking, and I assume that the coffee break dialogues and the lunch and dinner dialogues are much more interesting, sometimes even than the panels. So that's so this is a pity that I can't be this time with you. Anyway, let's try to answer your question, and let's put the as you asked for some kind of a cold shower. I think we need all the time, whatever we do, be it in the political sphere, in the social sphere, we need a reality check, and we need to put all initiatives that we have on in a kind of a wider context of global but also regional events. And given the fact that the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda was adopted in 2015, and that we are now quickly and fast approaching 2025, it has been 10 years. And the world has changed in the 10 years probably as fast and as dramatic as in the decades before. Probably the tectonic shift that came with the Corona crisis, the tectonic shift of the start of the Russian aggression and the return of war to Europe and to the globe, and the global challenges, shifting horizons between democracies, autocracies. Now the win of or rather a populist, erratic, post-truth politician in the United States to the President of the United States. These are all challenges that are tremendous. So basically we need to put whatever we have on in terms of agendas and kind of a declarations, we need to put it into a new context. And what I see as most important pieces of this context, and that brings me then to the Western Balkans and the question of the political participation and the political sphere, I see actually that the age of predictability has been replaced by the age of uncertainty. So whatever we have at the level of the United Nations, which by the way is in a deep crisis, and the Security Council is blocked due to the Russian aggression against Ukraine, whatever we have been able to predict in the 90s, in the 2000s, when we faced this kind of end of history and the beginning of a new era, it has turned into a new unpredictability, which puts additional challenges, particularly to the youth, as the youth faces an uncertain future horizon. This uncertainty for the youth includes not only the climate change, the question of war and peace, or overall security, but also actually the question whether the youth will be able to have a better life than the generation before, something that we used to have, at least in the West, as a kind of a notion of progress in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, that the next generations will be better off if we just put efforts into it, that there will be progress and growth that now put into a huge question mark. So we have tectonic shift on the global level. And now, when we come to the Western Balkans, we have to assume and start by arguing that the Western Balkans has always been a semi-periphery of the semi-peripheral region that very much depends on what happens at the core on the global scene. So the Western Balkans have been always exposed to external shocks. shocked as a semi-peripheral regions as we have experienced through the global financial crisis and as we are experiencing today. What does it mean for the political participation? What does it mean for the political scene? And what are the threats that we have that we are exposed to? I would list a few of them. The first one is that in general, the spaces for participation for liberal democratic values in the Western Balkans have been shrinking in the last few years. So when we look at the scorecard of 6 Western Balkan countries, but also at the scorecard of some neighboring countries like Hungary or Slovakia nowadays, we see actually a decline of democracy, democratic standards. We see a decline in general possibilities for not only for the youth, but for the overall population to participate. So if we have a tendency of de-democratization and sometimes even the rise of authoritarian tendencies, it automatically means that institutions are emptied of its meaning. The best example would be, I would argue, the Serbian parliament right now. I mean, just a few days or a few weeks ago, we had major clashes in the Serbian parliament between the oppositional parties and the governing party. And actually, you just saw in real lifetime almost a death of the Serbian parliamentarism. So having said that, when the institutions are captured and when there's this tendency of shrinking spaces, then the question is basically how to organize youth participation and how to engage youth in politics. And when you look at the studies like the Friedrich Ebert youth study that was just recently published a few weeks ago, you see that the youth is, on one hand side, optimistic, and there are some kind of a positive trends they want to engage, but there is also a certain type of, among at least certain part of the population of the young people, there is some kind of a depression and even a type of defeatism that they simply start assuming that they can't change anything, that the elite are too dominant, that the spaces are emptied of opportunities for political participation. So this is one, I think, major development going on in the Western Balkans, unfortunately. The second one, to add to it, and this relates to a very fundamental question for every society. Each and every society needs a horizon of hope. And the youth also, or the young population, they needs a kind of a horizon of hope. And in the region of the Western Balkans, the European Union, since 2000, or the European integration, was actually this horizon of hope. So you have a vision that you are trying to achieve to have a better life, materializing, and then welfare state, and sound institutions, and participation, etc., etc. And the process of European integration has been ongoing for 24 years now. It started in 2000 for the Western Balkans, and we have at the moment not really a prospect of any of the countries joining soon. So we have some positive steps in Albania and Montenegro. The new Commission of Enlargement announced actually that the countries, if they speed up the reform process, might be able to join by the end of the Commission's term at 27, 28. But this is up in the clouds. We can't say that this is really going to happen, because it depends very much on what's going to happen in Ukraine and what's going to happen internally in the European Union, how the German elections are going to play out, who is going to be the president of France, etc., etc. So we have a huge uncertainty here. And what we do have on the EU side, despite the rhetorical commitment to the EU enlargement and this horizon of hope, we actually have signs of transactionalism. So the EU engaging more and more in transactional deals with local political elites and leaders to keep the stability, to get, I don't know, the opportunity to dig lithium in Serbia, which is an ongoing topic right now, to save stability in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I mean, the situation is a bit better in Albania. In Kosovo, we still have the tensions in the north. And my point is actually that this kind of a horizon of hope that you need, that the youth need, in order to participate, to engage, to be activated, that this horizon, in terms at least of the European Union, also has been darkened and is not as hell and shiny as it was in 2000, 2005, 2010, etc., etc. And that brings me actually to the question of what can be done and what should be done. And I think there is something special about the young people. I mean, the young people always try to achieve the impossible. They believe in the future as they are young. They want to shape it. They don't give up. And the question is, what are the lines of action today in comparison to 2015, 2010? And I think there is a need to put an accent on certain aspects of the youth, peace, and security agenda within the context of the Western Balkans. I think the first one, my first point here is, as we see a spread of lies or let's say post-truth policies, not only the social media but also by politicians. So the truth or the facts are not given and they are contested. And there's even a hyper-production of disinformation, of propaganda from all sides. I think the youth, first of all, young people need to work on establishing facts, working based on facts, countering disinformation, engaging actually in producing new narratives of a young generation. I mean, that includes what the colleague on the panel just explained in terms of Kosovo, bringing the Serbs and the Kosovo Albanians together, showing that there is a horizon of a common shared values and common shared future. That means bringing people in Bosnia and Herzegovina together despite the political differences to work on something. It means overcoming difficulties that we have in Serbia, etc., regarding the Russian disinformation. So I think this should be and could be and needs to be one of the lines of engagement. The second one, I think we need youth engaging more in bottom-up initiatives and joining the bottom-up initiatives that we have in the region, be it the contentious protests, be it the alternative forms of participation through citizens' councils, etc., and by engaging in this emancipatory and pro-democratic bottom-up action to actually produce something that the famous US philosopher Martha Nussbaum, in her book Monarchy of Fear, described as practices of hope. The hope that everything is going to be better is very naive. What we need practices of hope. And practices of hope, I think, in the Western Balkans need to come bottom up. They can't be based on on top-down policies. And finally, to conclude, whatever is done, and I think there is a need to re-emphasize the norms and values, the democratic, liberal, human rights and fundamental rights based norms and values in whichever action the youth takes within the youth peace and security agenda. That includes fighting or standing up for rule of law, liberalism, human rights, and at the same time never allowing to compromise those values by non-democratic structures, by being co-opted by political elite, by being involved in some artificial, formal kind of a procedures of participation by non-democratic structures that we have in the Western Balkans, unfortunately. And that means less pragmatism and less opportunistic kind of a behavior by the youth and more principle value-based approach, which then can bring an additional impetus to the political participation, to the participation in the overall political processes. So that's a few thoughts from my side from Vienna.
Thank you very much for bringing what you call the reality check on the situation. Highlights of your interventions. It's painted a picture of some of the barriers that prevent meaningful youth participation in the region, be it shrinking civic space, what you call the horizon hope, or psychological effect, the lack of a common narrative that would drive young people to participate meaningfully. And I agree in the case of Albania, at least, there isn't a sense of ownership of young people in society when it comes to the European integration project. It is being portrayed as an initiative that belongs to the government. The government is the only actor that's pushing through, and the government is the only actor that will somehow receive the reward of this initiative. So without young people feeling that they are part of this journey, they are part of this work, and it's also their reward and their merit, everything will be more difficult, and young people will not be very motivated to engage, or will be rightfully discouraged to join any form of political participation. But thank you very much also for bringing practices, mentioning practices of hope in the region, and let's continue a bit on that. So the discussion has changed a bit. We have some food for thought to discuss also practically, and to come back to the main pillar, the main topic of discussion, youth participation. So in your experience, in your work, what can be some of these practices of hope to improve the situation of youth participation in the region?
Yeah, well, this was indeed a bit gloomy and depressing, but so are our data as well, because some of the main points that we also highlight in our research is that young people don't really trust their institutions. They don't trust that they can make any difference by voting, by participating in any sort of mechanism, because like when we ask them, please grade on a scale of 1 to 5 how much you trust this institution, that institution, whether it's the assembly, political parties, president, ministries, whatever. The average grade is, I think, 1.7, which is a very, very low number. And when we ask young people how many of them are planning to stay in their country and are sure they want to stay in their country for the foreseeable future, we only get around 10% positive answers. Only 10% of young people are positive they want to stay in Serbia for the foreseeable future, and they see something worth engaging with there. So this is one side of the story, but the other side of the story is something that is also happening right now as we speak in Serbia. I don't know how many of you follow like regional affairs, but we have all sorts of developments in the past weeks or so, where now, due to some horrible cases of corruption and some infrastructure harming and killing people in Serbia, and Novi Sad to be specific, there have been huge protests led by young people. And currently, out of 64 faculties, I think we were just talking about this morning, 33 of them are blocked. Young people are sleeping in their faculties, they're organizing roundtables, they're organizing plenary discussions, they're demanding accountability of their decision makers for something that has happened and for the way that they are leading their country. So we cannot really say that young people are all depressive and all passive and don't want to participate in their communities. They just don't see the mechanisms that exist as something worth engaging with. So if we're talking about how we can restore this faith in our state, how we can restore this feeling of belonging where you live, it's by getting young people back into the institutions, enhancing youth participation in a way that is appropriate for young people, which is not just something as sort of a roundtable or somewhere they're discussing with decision makers and are maybe consulted about something that is already going on in a certain way, a part of some recommendation written down somewhere on a paper, but really finding out what is the true mechanism that young people want to be involved in. And the way we are doing it seems to work so far. Getting back to how we perceive meaningful youth participation in Serbia, and as the National Youth Council of Serbia, the hands-on experience and the direct contact with the decision makers is something that is really, really key, because when we're organizing this sort of events, it's really not something that is just protocol. These decision makers hear a lot of uncomfortable stuff facing young people who are there to talk to them. And we're really trying to make this space something that is not full of tokenized young people, that is not just something that is happening because we got some money from our donors to organize a dialogue, but we really want to engage with authentic youth voices. And what you were saying about having some concrete recommendations, something that may seem small or not maybe systematic, but it's a really, really concrete recommendation of how we can move forward in the areas that are relevant to youth, is something that really seems to be working for us, not only from the data, but also from direct contact with young people. All of our participants of the youth dialogues are now engaged in the work, either in the CSOs or in the National Youth Council, or as members of the academia, but in one way or another, they continued dealing with youth participation in a sense. This is on a national level, but also when we're talking about the local level and the local communities, because we don't have a sort of a body that deals with YPS implementation yet, with the National Youth Council sort of voluntarily do it, but how we engage with the local level also, recently with the support of RICO, is also organizing these sorts of conversations, but also with ministries that are usually very closed off for youth. So now our following initiative is that we organize discussions with the representatives of Ministry of Defense, of Internal Affairs, of Foreign Affairs, on some topics that are not necessarily reserved for the youth, but are very actual for our generation. For example, we have the big debate on mandatory military service. We have ongoing a debate on how we can protect our young activists who are being arrested in the streets, who are facing police brutality. Every day they go and protest. We're having talks about radicalization and media narratives and the disinformation that Mr. Djikic was also mentioning as something that is also, yes, let's say an opportunity for the youth to de-radicalize themselves, but also a huge responsibility of the ministries to regulate how this public discourse is being handled on the other side. So really trying to figure out what topics are the topics that are popular for youth, what are the topics that if we discuss and if we get to some concrete results, are something that is going to make them believe that them engaging with their decision makers is actually having an impact on their life, is something that we think is extremely, extremely significant in moving forward, especially nationally and locally. When we're talking about the regional level, of course, there is a huge burden of history. There is a lot of tension still between our societies, but also we have some very common problems, such as brain drain. You were just talking about the structure, the age structure in Kosovo, which is partly due to modernization, but also extremely due to a lot of young people leaving Kosovo. So the smaller youth participation just reflects, the youth population just reflects how many people are willing and are leaving every year each of our societies. So this is a common topic we can work on. There is a lot of other common topics we can work on, which are more towards the positive peace aspects, such as youth employability and something that will bring them security and stability in that sort of sense. In this regional approach, something that is really, really important is the way we are reaching out to different communities, is the way that we are casting a really, really wide net of stakeholders, so we can actually engage with everybody who needs to be interacted with, not only youth representatives that are faces we always see and pretty much repetitively see at conferences on a national but also on a local level. So going a bit outside of the scope of what is usually the structure of these sorts of events, as you were saying, by reaching out also to local youth offices, stuff like that, but something that is also a very good practice when we're talking about, for example, employability as national employment agencies, but also social services and really the places where young people who are not in this sort of a conventional system may be found. So also something that can be worked more yeah, in the future.
Thank you very much. Diana, if you want to jump in with your insights.
I mean, Masha has mentioned a lot of the key points which are very similar to what we experience. And I mean, brain drain would be one of the major issues. And it's also brain drain is disproportional when it comes to different communities. It's also brain drain based on the perceptions of safety. And we have this massive exodus of young people from the northern, for example, Kosovo, Serbian youth mainly, but it triggers the changes throughout the whole, demographic structures, the structures of the employment, structures also of the offers on the employment side, so it changes the labor market. And I think it's also when we speak about unpacking the participation, it's about creating the sense of the safe space, because again, we're here dealing with two main categories of youth, which you also pointed out, that there are the usual suspects, whom we see everywhere, young people who are more confident, they have skills, they have networks, they have the information about what's happening and where to get involved. And yes, they end up being the advocates. And it's very essential in terms of, pushing for the social issues, pushing for the youth-sensitive issues also. But at the same time, when we speak about participation, it's also how do we reach out to these unusual suspects? Where do we break the ice? How do we create the spaces of the discussions? And even if it takes 10 info sessions and you end up with having 5 young people with shining eyes who say, we want to do something, that's an achievement already. But how to, overcome this fatigue? Because there is a sense of, nothing will change. There is a sense of, yes, but it's like NGOs are doing the whole work. If I'm not part of an NGO and I'm, let's say, 16, 17, what can I do in my society? And there's also the sense that once I graduate, I go to Germany and become a waiter. And how do we break through all those things also? It's even stronger with young women, sadly enough, because throughout this program on the participation and inclusive participation, I see a lot of gaps when it comes to the activities which tackle, I don't know, the soft key issues like human rights, activism, leadership. Leadership is like, it's not so soft, but in this perspective, we have more young women applying for the activities. When it comes to the trainings on the advocacy, for example, and participation in the local governance, which are seen as this, like, decision-making structures, whether it's at the local level or the central level, I have noticed that there are more young men applying. And there is a similar stereotype about, why. And no matter how much we try to speak about gender equality and so on, still there is a certain pattern of how the girls assess themselves in terms of perspectives for participation in the future. That yes, they don't mind being engaged in the student council or the youth council, but after the university they would see themselves doing something else often. And it also comes with the perceptions about how the family would see if they engage with the, like the municipal assembly, for example. Whether they see it as sustainable, whether they see it as long-term, whether they see something for themselves. And sadly enough, there is certain also stereotype about this. That maybe, like, yes, it's great to be engaged in the earlier stages, but afterwards I don't see myself doing this throughout. So also, how do we ensure the sustainability of these voices? How do we unpack those aspects? And I still want to bring this to the perception of the, it's like there are so many jokes in Russian that we have the freedom of speech, we don't have the freedom after the speech. So again, here's also the participation in terms of, like, engaging the participation and what happens after the participation. And often the answer is not the same for young people from different communities. I already mentioned the social pressure. And here, I think there is a big difference in terms of which activities we try to engage youth on. There are activities which naturally bring young people together. And in Kosovo, we saw this, a few years ago, there was the issue with the small hydropower stations. In the southern parts of Kosovo, in Brezovic and Shar Mountains. And because there were the issues which would damage heavily the ecosystem, that would create irreparable damage for the local communities, that the area is also ethnically mixed. But people who live by the edge of the mountains and the rivers, locals, whether it's Serbs, Albanians, or Roma in this case, they wouldn't have drinkable water just because of this, the hydropowers. And nobody needed to come and talk to young people to be engaged. They were there. They were at the forefront. They were the first ones. And it wasn't seen as the political engagement because it's something that's so clear, so close to the heart of everyone. And they didn't need to explain extra that yes, it's water, it's the basic safety, it's the basic well-being. When it comes to engagement on the more serious political issues, then we also need to think about what are the consequences. And from the perspective of, for example, myself as the program coordinator who works with the United Nations, and I need to think about what are the consequences of engaging young people on those specific aspects. And whether young people, after they engage with activity, or if we organize some kind of advocacy meeting with their ministries, whether they feel safe coming back home afterwards. and what happens after, and how do we address those issues. And usually they're invisible. And also some young people, they will speak about the experience if they have been bullied, for example, there's something happen, some will not. And also, how do we navigate this field? So do no harm while trying to activate young people. And I think here is also what's important, and I'm jumping on the role of international organizations in this case, whether it's UN, whether it's whoever is organizing the activities, is how do we push for the, the protection mechanism? How do we ensure that the youth activists who are engaged in the most sensitive political issues, because we want them to be engaged there. The whole idea of the Youth Peace and Security Agenda is to have young people as partners throughout, navigating these difficult questions. But how do we ensure that young people support afterwards? That they don't have them or their families, because sometimes the pressure goes through the family, that they receive the threat that if you continue talking about this issue, your father gets fired. And how do we navigate those areas? And I don't have the ready answers because it's a very complicated issue also. It's about also who runs, the agendas, what's behind, and what are the forces behind. But I think this is a very important aspects also. But again, from my experience, because a lot of work that we focus on is trust building between the communities. Trust building never happens for the sake of trust building. If you just say that we're organizing the peace event, young people might come, but they will not be too engaged. But when we talk about, okay, what's dear to your heart? What do you care about? What are the issues that you see in your community, in your city? What do you want to change? And then once you have these connecting points, you don't need to ask twice. The moment when young people feel that their support in doing something practical about this, they usually jump on the opportunity. And what I personally feel happy about when I see that there is somebody who's the usual suspect, but this usual suspect managed to activate other young people who were passive before about this issue. And then slowly but surely things start happening.
Thank you very much. One takeaway that I get from your insights is also the importance of local ownership. It's evident sometimes when workshops in small cities are organized and you see the interest, the spark, the desire of young people to be active being ignited. And unfortunately, if they don't have a support mechanism, if they don't have an active community or youth organization there, that spark dies out very fast. So the progress that's made goes back to almost zero. So it's very important, even in the context of the YPS agenda, to make sure that we empower local organizations, local communities whenever they are. And this task is even more difficult when you take into account the brain drain. Small cities are the biggest victims of brain drain. So the importance of working there it's double, I would say, and it's an approach that we should take into account. Now I'd like to ask another question to Professor Bedan. You mentioned, and I think it was also one of the conclusions of the panel of this morning, that there are indeed some models, there are indeed some practices, but apparently, in fact, we have to create new models and new practices that are more adaptable to today's situation. So you mentioned the need for bottom-up youth participation mechanisms. If you could elaborate a bit concrete examples of new ways of political participation of youth participation, that would bring more results, will build more trust among young people, more motivation, and also more results.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we have a whole pool of possible avenues for participation of the youth within the context of liberal democracies that have step by step being or have started being exhausted over in the West. So the institutional avenues, the usual institutional avenues that we use to have the talking to stakeholders, engaging with institutions, that's going to remain, but that's something that at least in the Western Balkans does not yield substantial results anymore. But the colleague from Serbia just mentioned the fact that now the universities and the schools are protesting, taking to the street, means that there is obviously a need to create new avenues of participation. So that brings me to the first point. I think in creating alternative spaces for participation, there is a huge quest for self-organized, new waves of deliberation, actually in general. So deliberation can happen within the institutions, but if the institutions are captured, you need to create new spaces. The new spaces can't be vertical, so they need to be horizontal. They need to be able to transcend ethnic boundaries. They need to be able to transcend the contested topics toward something that Chantal Mouffe, a political philosopher, described as agonistic kind of political realm, so where we don't end up in the antagonism, in looking into the other as a foe, but as a kind of a friend. That means that, for example, one tool of the horizontal type of participation would be agora type of assemblies. And agora means, going back to the ancient Greece, that you open up a space in a horizontal setup where you simply dedicate a lot of time and a lot of energy in keeping up those voices, or letting the voices from below creating new narratives, actually. I mean, and this is an exhausting exercise. It's a very democratic exercise, but it is an exercise that can't be, unfortunately, in the Western Balkans, can't be organized through institutional life. Another tool is something that I would place on the regional level. I think what we lack in the Western Balkans, in a very small region of 16, 17, 18 million population, I mean, given the brain drain and the fact that we don't have statistics, we even don't know how many people we have. In Bosnia, I mean, we estimate that there are 2.7 million. People. We don't have statistics for Serbia. But when we have such a small region, actually, we need to have regional fora for deliberation. That might be through networks. I mean, there's a network that I'm running, and which is financed by the European Fund for the Balkans. This is the kind of a bottom-up network called Engaged Democracy Initiative, where engaged citizens from environmental struggles, from struggles against corruption, for struggles for free education, for anti-corruption measures, for public spaces, etc., where they come in so-called conventions once per year, and when they work on a specific platform called Engaged Democracy platform, which is a protected space where no one can come from outside, and where they then engage in lengthy processes of deliberation, exchanging, and trying to come up with certain solutions. And that needs to be on a regional level. So when you, I mean, we all have national problems, but we are a very small region. We need to connect and create kind of a space for the regional political participation, exchanging practices, taking best practices on board, lessons learned, and then creating all the new narratives. And lastly, something that has been tested and used in many Western European countries, and also in Austria, in Germany, the citizens' assemblies on the local level, municipal level, with a huge engagement of all parts of the population, not focusing only on the usual suspects, so not focusing on those that are able to express themselves, speak English, not focusing on professional civil society, but simply on a strata, on a setup of people that are representing the local communities. And then you dedicate an effort to, let's say, discuss a very concrete daily or an issue that is affecting our community. So that might be a mini hydropower plant that is built or planned to be built close to Jajce in Bosnia, or that might be a mountain in Montenegro, Svinjevina, where some people came together and organized something. And these kind of local communities, the local community citizens councils, where you also include marginalized communities, can create an additional or a different view actually on political problems, and come up with local solutions for local problems that then can be replicated also on the national level. And just to conclude, I think we need in general more of unusual practices and less of established practices that we used to have in the last 1 or 2 decades. We need to move partly beyond institutions. We need to use fantasy in creating the horizons of hope, and even more in times of shrinking spaces, in times of captured states, and in times of a tendency of political elites to replicate themselves by, on one hand side, presenting a kind of rhetorical Potemkin's villages, presenting them as democratic, etc., but on the other hand side, being engaged in authoritarian, clientelistic, or nepotist practices. We need, on the other hand side, fantasies to dismantle those structures and those narratives, to confront them. And what we see, for example, today on the streets of Serbia and young people at university, we see an enormous amount of creativity. We see a lot of courage. And I think those practices can then pave a way for new types, more creative or more hopeful types of political participation in general.
Thank you very much. Your intervention also reminded me of a challenge that the Coalition of Youth for Youth, Peace and Security in Finland is facing right now. As we know, Finland is the first country in the world that adopted the National Action Plan. Now they are drafting the second National Action Plan, and when asked about obstacles, they said that the main obstacle they face is reaching out to people outside of the usual suspect. They said the majority of people engaged with YPS in Finland are probably young women living in Helsinki or in the cities nearby. And so that's a lot to think about, talking about Finland, taking it as a best example, and this is a challenge they face, and I think every country in the region has to take into account we don't need to reach to that point before we address it, we have to address it right now. And another thing that it reminded me is one very common recommendation regarding youth participation YPS, which is differentiating youth representation. I think some of the models that the professor mentioned align with this kind of thought. The idea is to take special care to distinguish between youth who represent their views and those who are representatives speaking on behalf of youth. So it's important to differentiate between those two approaches, those two mechanisms. Of course, both are needed, but apparently from our discussion, I think that the ones regarding the youth expressing their own views instead of just represented positions are more than needed in our region. Now, I would like to open the floor if there are questions or comments from the audience. Well, since there are none and we are running a bit out of time, I would like to thank the panelists for this really interesting discussion. I mentioned the word journey maybe 2 times, but the panel was a journey. I mean, starting on a different note, it continued different direction. Now we ended up a bit differently, but I think personally it had a lot of food for thought. It's good to acknowledge the accomplishment, good practices, achievement that has been done, while also at the same time be critical of what remains to be done better. And I think that each country in the region can learn from each other. It's important to mention also what Milena mentioned in the morning sessions. Be aware of colonial approaches that come from the West and get away with those. I mean, refuse those kind of approaches. And this is why platforms such as Peace Week, or what ONA tries to do with Peace Week, is bring together these different perspectives, talk honestly, sometimes the hard, ugly truth to each other, but end it on a positive note with more energy, food for thought, ideas, with the acknowledgement that there's a lot of work to be done, but this is why I think we have chosen to do what we do in our everyday life. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a great rest of the evening.